Right then, welcome to this deep dive. We've got a fascinating set of sources here, all centered on the Wiltshire Moonrakers.
Yes, quite a famous bit of local folklore.
Absolutely, and our job today is really to unpack it. Look at the historical backdrop of smuggling. Get into the actual folktale.
The story itself.
Yeah, and think about those flights of contraband, what the smugglers were actually trying to achieve their goals and, the outcomes.
And how it all fits together chronologically. The sources, the historical notes, glossary bits, they give us a good range, I think.
Definitely. So the scene, we're talking 18th century rural England, right? Wiltshire specifically.
That's the heartland. And the wool trade was significant then, apparently bringing in Flemish and Dutch traders.
Ah, yes, to places like Swindon. And these traders, the notes mention, had a taste for gin and brandy.
Which is where the trouble starts, isn't it? Because of the import duties.
Exactly. High taxes on spirits. So you had these traders wanting their drink and local publicans wanting to, boost their profits.
By avoiding the duty. Creates the perfect conditions for smuggling, really.
A perfect storm, as you say. The economic push is key here.
It really is. Those duties made legal imports expensive, so the illicit trade became, very tempting. Despite the dangers.
And Wiltshire's location played a part, too.
Oh, very much so. It was right on these secret routes, smuggling highways almost.
Highways, right.
Yeah.
Running from the south coast inland.
Yeah, picture the scene. Goods, mostly spirits like brandy and gin, landed quietly on the coast. Maybe Dorset, Hampshire coves.
Oh, the other way places.
Definitely. Then transported overland across Hampshire into Wiltshire, and Swindon seems to have been a key endpoint.
Because of the Dutch and Flemish connections?
Precisely. They were the ready market, I suppose. It's interesting how these flights, these movements, must have been quite organized.
You think so? Not just opportunistic.
Well, perhaps a bit of both, but the sources imply established routes, moving that quantity of stuff, avoiding detection. It suggests some level of planning.
And gin and brandy were the main things. Because of the high duties.
Seems that way. Popular drinks, big markup if you avoided the tax. Worth the risk for some.
And the risks were real. Excisemen, the revenue officers, always lurking. The threat of being caught was serious.
The sources mention harsh punishments, so it wasn't trivial.
Not at all. Fines, prison. It kept things tense. You need to be clever, secretive.
Which I suppose brings us nicely to the folk tale itself, the Moonrakers story.
The core narrative, yes. We know it's quite old, certainly around before 1787, because Gross mentions it in his glossary then.
Okay, so what's the story? Smugglers. Brandy.
Right. A group of smugglers, they've hidden their contraband French brandy barrels in a village pond.
In a pond. Seems a bit damp.
Well, yes, but maybe effective for hiding. The location usually cited as Cramer Pond in Devizes.
Okay, Cramer Pond. And they're trying to get it back out.
Exactly. At night. And crucially, there's a full moon.
Ah, the moon. Hence the name later, I assume.
Precisely. So they're there with their rakes, trying to fish out these barrels. What was the ultimate goal with the brandy? Just get it out and sell it.
Presumably transported onwards. The sources suggest the Pelican Inn in Devizes was the likely destination. Sell it on, make their profit, avoid the duty. That seems the main goal.
Standard smuggling procedure. But things go wrong.
Well, right on cue, an excise man turns up. Catches them in the act, or so he thinks.
Bit awkward.
This is where the quick thinking comes in. One of the smugglers, John Chapman of Devizes is often named, comes up with a brilliant excuse.
Go on.
The excise man asks what on earth they're doing. Chapman, supposedly laying on a thick Wiltshire accent, points at the reflection of the full moon in the water and says they're trying to rake out that yeller cheese.
The moon's reflection?
Yes.
As a cheese. Seriously.
That's the story. He plays the complete yokel. The thick accent, the ridiculous claim.
Banking on the stereotype of simple country folk.
Exactly. And it works. The excise man is totally taken in.
He believed them.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
Thought they were just harmless idiots, maybe even laughed at them and went on his way.
Incredible. So the smugglers achieved their goal. They got away with it.
In this telling, yes. The excise man is fooled. The smugglers get their brandy later. They have the last laugh, as the notes say. A neat outcome for them.
A classic tale of local cunning versus authority. Let's talk about the people involved. John Chapman. Anyone else?
The name Old Mr. Mabet from Tillshead also comes up. Suggests it might have been a small group, maybe drawing from nearby villages.
Shows a bit of a network, perhaps?
Could well do. These operations often weren't solitary affairs, and the location, Kramer Pond in Devizes, seems pretty solid.
The sources seem quite confident, yes. The Wiltshire Council's history project points strongly towards it.
Though there's that slight confusion with Bishop's Canning's parish, isn't there?
Ah, yes. Explain that bit.
Well, historically, the pond was actually in Bishop's Canning's parish, but the boundary changed in 1835, putting it into Devizes town.
Right, so older accounts might mistakenly place it in Bishop's Canning's village itself.
Exactly. Even though there's apparently no pond in the village proper, it's just an administrative boundary quirk that explains some confusion.
Clears that up. And the Pelican Inn remains the likely spot for the Brandy's destination.
Seems the most plausible candidate.
So, this one incident, this clever trick with the moon's reflection, it really stuck. It gave Wiltshire folk their nickname.
Moonrakers, yes. But the irony is how it started.
How so?
Well, the story goes that the excise man initially spread the tale.
To show how dim Wiltshire people were.
Precisely. He thought he'd encountered idiots trying to rake cheese out of a pond. He was telling it as proof of their stupidity, completely unaware he was the one who'd been duped.
That's brilliant. The story gets turned on its head.
It really does. It becomes a badge of honor, signifying cunning, not foolishness. It shows how folklore works, doesn't it? Preserving local identity.
And it passed down orally. You mentioned William Little, the shepherd.
Yes, he's noted as retelling it. And then you have poets like Edward Sloe writing it down in the Wiltshire dialect later on, 1881.
Cementing it in local culture.
Absolutely. It moves from anecdote to established legend. Writing it down, especially in dialect, gives it a whole new level of permanence.
And the name still echoes today, though maybe not always flatteringly.
Yes. The football rivalry. Oxford United fans using Moonrakers for Swindon Town supporters.
As a bit of an insult, implying they're simple.
Seems to be the gist, even though, as the notes point out, the original Moonrakers were strictly from Devizes, geographically speaking.
Shows how these labels stick and get reapplied, though, doesn't it?
It certainly does. The original meaning gets diluted or twisted over time.
So, wrapping this deep dive up, the Moonrakers story feels like, well, a perfect blend of things.
Definitely. You've got the historical reality smuggling was rife, driven by economics. Those flights were real.
Then you've got the cleverness, the local wit beating the system, the specific goal of that night.
And the unexpected outcome, not just getting the brandy, but creating this enduring identity, even if the initial interpretation was wrong.
It really highlights the power of a good story, how folklore shapes a place.
It encapsulates that tension between, ordinary rural folk and the authorities. Ingenuity under pressure.
Makes you think, doesn't it? How much do these local tales passed down really form our sense of belonging to a place, a community?
A very good question. And what does this specific story, the Moonrakers, tell us about that relationship with authority back in the 18th century? Clearly not always straightforward obedience.
No, indeed. There's a definite streak of defiance, of outsmarting the powers that be. It's a reminder of that fascinating mix of fact and fiction in local legends.
And how even a simple, funny story can actually tell you a lot about a particular time and culture.
Absolutely. Perhaps listeners might fancy looking into smuggling history in their own areas. Or other local nicknames. You never know what you might uncover.
Could be quite revealing.
Indeed. Well, until our next deep dive then.